All right. Hello and welcome everyone once again to our latest edition of the TIKE webinars. Today, once again, this is a continuation of conversations we started earlier this year. We're going to be deep diving into the world of API governance once again. For those who've attended exactly a month ago, Leap 2.0, it was all about API governance. We looked at multiple sessions, multiple aspects, many nuances, both for decision makers as well as for implementers of API governance. It was primarily a jumping off point for all things API governance at the start of the year. This is the continuation of that specific conversation. This is the next chapter, next iteration in how you can take all that you've learned, all that you've heard around API governance, and bring that to life in your organization. So today we're going to be exploring how you can go from chaos, the chaotic world of APIs and its aggressive growth, all the way to something that resembles a degree of control and confidence. And we'll help you accelerate your API governance maturity, both from a process standpoint as well as from a platform standpoint. I am Buddha, developer advocate at TIKE and the board chair of the Open API Initiative. Very happy and honored to bring you and host you today, this morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm joined here today by two very exciting, very experienced guests. We're going to be looking again at the world of API governance from two very specific lenses. A little bit more about that later on. But before that, quick introductions. Perhaps welcome Mark, first time collaborating with us together. Happy to have you with us.
Hey, Buddha, it's great to be here. Hey, everyone. Yes, I'm Mark Boyd. I use the pronouns he and him. I'm the director at Platformable, where we support the development of open digital ecosystems. So API governance right at the heart of a lot of what we do.
Thank you so much, Mark. Happy to have you with us once again. Carol, one of my favorite partners in webinars, events, and all things API governance. Welcome to this webinar.
Great, thank you, Buddha. And I'm very excited to have the webinar with Mark together today too. So hi, everyone. I'm Carol. I'm a product manager at TIKE. My main area is around the platform capabilities we provide. And today, very excited to share anything around API governance.
Right. Thank you so much, Carol. Before we get into the thick of things, essentially, just a bit of housekeeping. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen or at the side of your screen, depending on how you're approaching Zoom, I guess. You'll be able to ask questions at any point if you want. You should have your chat enabled as well. If it isn't, please let me know. You can introduce yourself, you can ask questions. We'll take questions towards the end of the session. If there is something that can ladder up into a discussion that we're already having, I'll be happy to facilitate that as well. There will be a couple of polls that we'll be taking throughout the course of today's session. So I would encourage you to interact and engage with us. Ideally, usually, if you engage and interact, it's a better learning experience. It's a better webinar experience for both us as well as you. API governance is a very important topic, and I think that's been said over and over again. Today, we're going to be helping you take that next step by providing you with a blueprint that combines a process, a model, a framework, which you can use to create your API governance strategy, which is then you can enforce or fulfilled with a universal governance platform. So lots to look forward to. Let's get straight into it. Quickly, just to give you a bit of a background, I think about a month ago, exactly a month ago, we had Leap 2.0, as I mentioned earlier on, the API Governance Conference. We tackled a whole lot of topics or different aspects of API governance. I think there were two things that became very clear. One, the fact that API governance matters. It is something that is top of mind for a lot of people in the industry today at different levels of understanding and clarity, I would admit. But it is something that you've told us is very important. And the second part is people are still looking at how do you build out a proper governance strategy that works for your organization? There are certain examples out there. There are certain ways of thinking about API governance, but does that really work for you, or do you need to approach it a little bit differently? Those are the questions that we're going to be looking to answer today. So with that, just a little bit of background around why this has become such an important and valuable aspect already. And I think one of the key aspects of this is the aggressive growth in the world of APIs. This is something that we touched upon at Leap as well, but really where we are today is we're already looking at over 200 million active APIs in action right now as we speak, and this number is only going up. And it's slated to go up to a number of 1.7 billion potentially by the year 2030. And personally, I think this is a conservative number because the way the industry, the ecosystem is moving today with AI and AI agents, I feel like that number is going to expand even further by the time we get to 2030. So this aggressive API growth has obviously resulted in a couple of things. And that chaos, if you just put it into a picture, is indicative of what you see here. There are challenges around cost management and visibility. There are challenges around shadow APIs. There are security concerns, discoverability issues. There's lack of observability because end-to-end platform stacks are becoming more and more complex to be able to visualize. There are integration challenges because there are, again, different systems potentially speaking different languages. If you're not having open standards at the heart of it all, there is potentially bad developer experience, lack of documentation because of the speed of development. There might be scalability challenges as a consequence of all of this. Sounds a little bit chaotic, doesn't it? I think that is exactly where we are today. And that is the challenge that we are trying to address. Now, with that being said, you throw AI into the mix. And again, I'm using the term AI a bit generically because for the sake of simplicity, but I think primarily we're talking about AI agents at this point of time, perhaps. But I'm going to use the term generically for the time being. We'll deep dive into AI and the world of AI supply chain next time and next month. But for now, if you throw AI into the mix of this chaotic environment, then what you see is that this all just gets more and more chaotic. It grows exponentially. The dysfunction of the APIs and the landscape of governance becomes exponential. So that's what we want to try and avoid. This is where we are today. This is what is the consequence of having all of these APIs coming up really, really quickly without having the right checks and balances, right governance and policies in place. So you don't want chaotic dysfunction becoming exponential already. Because chaos typically means increased risk. So if you really zoom out of that picture, which is a bit more technical in nature, if you zoom that out from a business standpoint, chaos equates to increased risk in your business. It equates to increased costs in your business. It slows down your go-to-market. Your release cycles can slow down because you are burdened by so many different operational challenges that might pop up. It slows down your innovation, or in some cases, completely reduces or removes it from the equation altogether. And innovation, as much as possible, is important. It's something that you need to keep going to keep your competitive advantage and not be left behind. So chaos, not good. I think that's probably an easy way of putting it. And I think there are considerations for this, and there are reasons why this has become more and more a challenge. And I think that a big aspect of this is because people have considered API governance for a very long period of time to be, well, a technical problem that needs a technical solution. And I think that's what governance actually is not. If you really look at the definition of API governance today, it is a lot more collaborative in nature. It's a lot more forward thinking. It's strategic in nature. It is something that is enabling innovation, development. It doesn't want to be it doesn't want to be a roadblock. It needs to be an enabler and enforcer. But the problem is where governance is today, for a lot of people, it's a technical problem that requires a technical solution. And that's the approach that people take by going platform first. And what that also means that if you're going platform first, you're essentially buying a platform and you're essentially governed by the rules of the platform as opposed to thinking business first and what your business needs. So you don't want any of that. That also results in trying to control that chaos in a way that provides rigid controls in place or rigid policies, something that, again, people tend to associate API governance with. You do not want to enforce pure rigid controls because that will choke your innovation. It's going to choke your developers. It is not going to provide the right guardrails and avenues and platforms that will encourage developer autonomy, nor will it encourage the right business outcomes that you want. So governance, as much as it is about controlling the chaos, it is also not about rigid controls being enforced. So what is API governance? So if I were to put it in terms that hopefully simplifies things. It's a business problem, very much a business problem. It is something that the business needs to think about holistically. It needs a business solution to achieve certain business outcomes. So how do you go about it? The age-old adage of people, process, and platforms still reigns supreme in the world of API governance. And that's how you should be approaching this, where you think about the business problem, take that, have the right people in the room, the stakeholders that matter, find the solution collaboratively, translate that into processes and policies, and then finally enforce or fulfill them by a flexible, composable, open standards native platform. That's the role. The platform is an enforcer. It is not the key driver. So that's something that is a mindset shift that you need to consider and think about. And all of these being brought together is what instills confidence and trust in the platform, in the policies, in the overall tool that you're creating, overall APIs that you're building, and the business at large. So what we want to do is to take that chaos, build in controls such that you can instill confidence and trust. And the only way to do that is by bringing the people, process, and platforms together. And we'll see what that looks like today. Obviously, with this sort of introduction, we'll have Mark coming up next, who's going to be telling us, touching upon this people and process aspect of things and how you can start looking into your own position, your current state of affairs when it comes to API governance. And then how do you take that next step in your API governance maturity and formulate a strategy, a plan, or governance aspect which would work for your specific context. You want to be able to do that. And once we've got that plan in place, that framework in place, that's when you have your platforms, a universal platform in this case, that will enable you to enforce those policies. And ideally, where we want to get to is to be able to automate and scale them up. We want API governance to help us work better as opposed to being additional work itself. That's where we want to get to. So final part, what does this actually mean for a business? If you're really getting API governance right, what is that final outcome that you're really looking at? And categorize this into 3 key buckets. Again, your KPIs might differ from what I've positioned this to be right now. But really, if I were to categorize, there is a productivity aspect of things where you are enabling better development, faster development, shorter release cycles for your development teams overall. So higher productivity is a good thing. Cost savings, because you're now trying to standardize across specific tooling, specific conventions. You're not having 5 different ways of doing the same thing that either a platform or a policy can come together to actually achieve. So there is real cost savings, both direct from a tooling standpoint, as well as indirect from a time perspective as well. And then finally, innovation. This is API governance is meant to be an enabler and a driver of innovation. You want to be able to keep up to speed with where the industry is going. You don't want to have to think and get bogged down by all the operational aspects of things, which would only keep you far behind your competition. We want you to succeed. We want to succeed together in this case. We want to look at productivity, cost savings, and innovation coming together as your primary outcomes here. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Mark, who's going to take us through a journey of API platform maturity using the API Governance Toolkit. So I'm going to quickly get out of the screen and bring up yours. While we are doing that, once again, if you do have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. What I want to do before we go into this is I'm going to really quickly launch a short poll. This is going to be just to get a bit of a gauge of your current state of API governance maturity. So tell us which bucket you kind of fall under. There are 4 levels here. Whether you're starting off at a place where you have no formal API governance in place, some sort of basic API guidelines, some sort of policy and standardization, or something that is fully automated, which will be a great place to be, I think. But again, no state is necessarily better than the others. You should have something in place, but that's where the context of your organization, the state of affairs, your priorities matter. And that's what Mark is going to take us through as well. So while you're doing that, I'm going to hand this over to Mark. Mark, take it away.
Great, thanks, Buddha. Great introduction, setting up the scene here. Let's go on to the next slide. So, as I mentioned before, Barcelona-based startup. We're purpose-focused, so we try to look at how we can encourage best practices, and we look at outcomes that are going to support the economy, local societies and communities, and make good environmental use of resources as well. But our mission is to support the development of open digital ecosystems, and that's where Buddha and I met, because we're working around things like open standards and the encouragement of the adoption of open standards, API governance, which then in turn leads to greater opportunities to participate, and so on. Next, let's dig straight into the API Governance Toolkit. So here we've got our link. Our API Governance Toolkit is a best practices model, as well as a process around how you can identify where you are in the stage of maturity around that those best practices, and we'll talk about that for most of this session. And then there's other things that we refer to. So there's the API landscape that's managed by API Days, for example, that lists all of the potential tooling vendors that you can work with, or the open source projects and so on that might be there to help you. And we've got some templates coming up around an API playbook, some open API specification templates, and then a guide around what sort of analytics to measure to support your API governance efforts. So keep an eye on that post for as we keep building it out. Next, well, let's just quickly talk about why API governance. So here's the value statement behind API governance. You can actually use a lot of the opposites of the chaos issues that Buddha raised as well to be able to create your own value statement, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important a bit later. But internally, like Buddha has pointed out, it's faster product development, more efficient. You get to reuse the work you've already done, increasing that developer productivity, keeping developers in their flow, or in your flow if you're a developer, so that you're able to just do your work, the exciting part of your work, building and creating stuff and seeing it work at performance levels in production, rather than trying to figure out what data model to use, or how the last API was built, and what naming conventions were used for that, and to use that in this one as well, and all of that stuff that takes you out of the fun parts, or the work that you like doing the most. That's for internal. For external and for partners, it generates value towards that open ecosystem approach. It means that more people can come on board, more organizations and businesses, and start using your APIs faster. It makes you think about standards development, so that as you're participating in larger ecosystems. So if you're a finance app and you're wanting to operate in the larger open banking, open finance ecosystem, then you understand what standards you're aligning with, you're interoperable with those, and that flows all the way down to your APIs, each and every single one that you're offering, and so on. Faster time to market, as Buddha had said, increases because the API because the value of your APIs is felt by your customers and your API developers, that it means that if they can understand the second API that you've got the same way they understood the first, they're going to stick with you, and they're going to actually then build with 5 or 6 or however many open APIs you've got, and they're not going to want to move to other API providers where they're going to have to learn those APIs. And if those APIs are chaotic, they've got to learn each individual API with those providers. So, it increases that lifetime value of customers. And, also you've invested in API management platforms, so you may as well get the value out of it. A lot of the work that we do is the starting point is they want to get an API management platform in place, but they don't have good API governance. So it's sort of like, well, unless you focus on that as well, you're only getting 10% of your platform investment, or 30%. You can make up percentages if you like. And then, as Buddha said, it prepares you for AI implementation. We won't go into that too much. Okay, let's get into it then. Here's our maturity model. So but Buddha, is there responses to that poll? Are we able to hear a sneak peek?
Yes, let me see if I can pull that out.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I
Yes.
was just thinking
No
this
worries.
would help.
Yeah, there you go. You should be able to
Okay,
see it on the
great.
screen
So
now.
a lot of you here are at this first level of maturity. Okay, cool. So let's talk about, so this is great. That helps me a great deal. Thanks, Buddha, because then I can focus on, where you all are at. So here you can see the first level of maturity. We've got the best practice model in the corner. We'll get into, you'll see the big thing there. But at this level, we tend to find that you've probably got a couple of these things in place. Maybe you're using API specifications, async, GraphQL, open API specification to be able to define your API. Maybe it's a template, maybe not, but you're probably on that road somewhere. You may have some very loose guidelines. So you may have actually, we often see this at the team level. The teams will reuse some of their naming conventions or reuse some of their data models. So we sort of see it at that sort of point. You write your API code. You've probably got the testing sorted. We find that people have got testing sorted more than governance. And then if it's if it's for an external audience, then you're putting it up on your developer portal. So that's kind of like where it sounds like most of you are at. It's sort of like it's a random selection of almost like API design and deployment practices rather than a governance model at the moment. Let's look at when we move to that next stage of maturity. This is where we, so this is where we want, from the sounds of it, this is the part where you're at, where you're ready to start thinking about this. So this is, to be at this level of maturity, what you're doing is you're looking at your as-is situation and trying to think a little bit more strategically about it. So you'll remember, well, first of all, Buddha has talked about the chaos and then the benefits of API governance. And then I walked through some of the API governance, why API governance as well. That's this on the circle, or the blue circle on the left-hand side. This is what you want. You want to start writing down a series of value statements about what the benefits of API governance are. Like what do you hope to do it? And think about it from a business perspective. So what you want to do is, because part of API governance, you're going to need to be getting the number of people on board. It's that people part of what Buddha was talking about. So you need to understand how to be able to do that storytelling that Kin Lane is just so good at being able to encourage everyone to do. Think about the stories that you want to tell around what the benefits of API governance are. I haven't seen a place where you don't need to write that down, and that can be the starting point. You want that to be able to be a drumbeat for all of the work that you want to do. And then generally there's some group of people or someone at some level in the business that is deciding that you're going to make APIs, to get to know, start to map out who those people are, who are the ones who say, an API can be used to solve this. We know in the old days it used to be a team or a developer team just would figure out that the fastest way to do something was with an API, so they would build it. But now it's more of a business strategy sort of level where it might be the business unit lead or senior architect or someone that's saying, build this with an API. Then we've got the pink section here. I don't really want to go into that too much because as Buddha was saying, let's focus on some of those business concerns rather than the technical. All of this stuff. These are the sorts of things that we tend to see. The style guides, the specifications, again, the testing, maybe then starting, I think, in the next stage, we start talking about a linter. And then there's a very manual process, the yellow one there, that's about like looking at your API before it gets to deployment on the right-hand side there with your, adding to the developer portal, starting to make sure you've got minimum documentation available and so on. So that's sort of the next stage of maturity. It's sort of like now you're starting to try to think, okay, we need to be a bit more cohesive and have repeatable processes for each one of these and start to draw some of those tooling at the bottom, that platform pieces. I want to talk about that top part, the organizational context. Let's jump to the next slide. At this stage, You also want to step back a little bit and think about what's your organizational structure that you've got in place. Is it centralized? So for API governance, for example, has management said we need API governance, everyone must do API governance, we're setting up an API governance committee, that's right in the style guide, you must use the style guide. You know, that's the centralized approach. It's kind of a little bit easier because then, you know, you can sort of say, well, you know, the C-level have said that we've got to do this, or you know, it's a requirement. We can't pass the APIs unless it's done, and everyone sort of does that, and then spends half their time also trying to go around that because their APIs are quite unique, you know, and don't fit into those sorts of style guides. And then there's a backlog. Then this way, often, you know, it will get to that yellow circle in the diagram I showed, and then there's a backlog of all of these APIs that need to be reviewed and passed and so on. So that's one method, you know, can work in large enterprises. Then the next one's the federate or structure. The next one is the federated model, and that's bottom up, where it might be an individual team is thinking, look, we're building APIs, we want them to be more consistent. So they're encouraging their teams or multiple teams within their business unit to all be building APIs with the same naming conventions, using the same data models and so on. It may be that it's, and then what we tend to see is that lines of business in a sort of inner source way almost, one line of business might share their APIs with another line of business. How did you make search available in your API? That sort of thing, you know, and then you sort of start seeing that cross-pollination, and that sort of builds up, that sort of bottom-up approach. And then there's the one where, you know, team topologies really pushes on, and we've seen a number of organizations move to this model where you've got a centralized, it's federated structure, so line of business, but you've got a centralized platform team that then builds out things like an internal developer portal or manages the API management platform and so on, and maybe they manage the style guide for the organization, and they've got an enablement team that then goes to each of those lines of business and says, hey, you're building a new API, did you know we've got the style guide? You can, you know, use that to implement best practices and so on, you know. So that could be, that's sort of another way that we're seeing emerge. Buddha, we've got our poll.
Yes, we do. Just a moment. I will launch that right now. So this poll is just to get a bit of a gauge of, you know, which of these sort of organizational context you can identify with, essentially, or what does your organizational context look like? So tell us in the poll: centralized, federated, platform enablement, or is it something different? Or is there nothing at all? That's the none option, essentially. If you don't have any structure whatsoever in place, then that's none. Or if you've got a different structure in place outside of these three, then choose other.
That's great. The none will be interesting because how can you have none? It's like, it's a business idea. We've got an idea for a startup. So the reason why, well, let's go to the next slide. But the reason why that's important to do at this stage is because you don't want to be pushing your API governance in a structure that's not going to work. So for example, if you work in that federated approach, you're not going to want to create a style guide and have a process for signing off on APIs that everyone must conform to, because that's not how your organization works. No one's going to buy that. It needs to, instead, you need to think about, okay, well, we're going to do it within our team or within our business unit, and we're then going to use an inner source approach, put it on a wiki or on the intranet or whatever, or maybe we host an open hours with other API teams from other lines of business, and we show them how we're doing the style guide and we see if they want to adopt it. Or maybe we proactively look at the other lines of businesses APIs and find out their data models, and we use their data model and we let those teams know, oh, we're using your data model from that API rather than build it ourselves, you know, so people get that sense of like, oh, let's start sharing these you know, common approaches and all the rest. So so understanding, oh, and if there's a platform enablement team, you're working with them, you're encouraging them to put it higher on the agenda, which is why at this level, when we're really starting now to try to mature our API governance processes, budget and resources come into the picture. So it's not just about understanding your organizational context, it's about putting some dollars or putting some people behind freeing up their time to be able to ensure that there's that tooling along the bottom that we that would support all of this work. And here you can see, okay, we've got that values statement. There's wider processes in place that are deciding on the APIs. We've got those processes in the pink there, the more technical aspects. Now we're moving towards having a linter that automates some of our style guide rules and so on. Then we've got our sign-off process, and bang, it's up. The final slide then. Please. Thanks, Buddha. Okay, and so here's the full model. Again, you can go to that link, and Buddha's going to share an email with further links as well. We've aligned it with the software development lifecycle here, you can see. But then, that what we tend to see, in my ideal world, you would actually do this blue stuff first, which is the identifying your developers that are going to be using your API and thinking through what do they need and how you're going to work with them. I'm yet to work with an organization around API governance who is willing to do that first, so we've put it here in the end of the maturity, because what we find is that people start with those other three levels of maturity that I've talked about. Then they flesh out this pink part, which is all the processes, get all of those tight. Then they've got the review, which now can be automated. The linter can tell you that your style guide, yep, you've conformed with all your style guide rules, and it goes through the testing. So now it can go straight to deployment because it's passed all of those angles. And then what we see is, again, that first row of columns in the green, that's, you putting it up on your developer portal, and maybe on some sort of internal platform as well, or internal portal, or just having it visible in your API management platform. There we see now start to move towards product management. So setting up analytics, thinking about roadmaps, allocating a product manager, and so on. And then it's at that stage we see the cycle come back where they actually then think, okay, well, with a product manager, you're then getting analytics where you can start thinking about, okay, how are our developers using our APIs and so on. So that's this is where you want to get to. But, based on what you've already got, based on your organizational context, and your ability to act either globally or within your own team, or somewhere in the middle, this is where we sort of move to with maturity and where you want to end up. And it's great to hear what Buddha was saying, because again, you can see along the top line, that dark purple, that's your people. Then you've got this middle section, which is your processes, and then at the bottom, you've got the tooling, which is your platform approaches. And I know I'm looking forward to hear Carol dig into this platform approach a bit more, the platform technology a bit more in the next round of discussions. But really great. Thanks again, Buddha and Carol, for inviting me to speak, and great to share with you this model we've been using with enterprises and organizations of all sizes. Oh, you might be on mute.
All right. Am I back then?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really good, just to get a feel and understanding of the governance toolkit, as well as the maturity model and the levels, and how you sort of structured it as well. So that's very good. Just on the poll, by the way, there were a couple of nones. I'm assuming that reflects that there may not be a process or a level of API governance strategy in place already. So they might be really early stage. So maybe that doesn't exist at this point. And I think there is an other as well, which I would be very curious to know, that if there is a model that is outside of these three, what would that actually look like as well? I think that could be quite an interesting one to approach. But primarily centralized, as you would pretty much imagine. There were a couple on federated, a few on platform enablement as well. So it's a bit of a mix. I think the one that I'm definitely curious about is the other part. So if there is a different model or organizational context for you, then feel free to put that in the chat as well. And once again, if you've got questions for Mark, feel free to add that right now. We'll pick those up after Carol's section is done. So Kai
Thanks,
mentions,
Kai. Yeah.
I none. I get it.
Can I just quickly add then, as far as the centralized model? So look, that really means that you're going to be trying to you're going to have to try to think about what you can do in your teams and start demonstrating that value outwards, because you don't have the influence to tell, organization to set up an API governance committee or so on. So, rather than be frustrated that there's not all of that in place and your ideas just get knocked down, just work up from where you are and the teams that you can control. That's where we go with that. Thanks, Buddha.
Thanks a lot, Mark. All right, over to you, Carol. Tell us a little bit more about, now that we've got a little bit of an understanding of the maturity of API governance, as well as how to put a strategy in place, the kind of policies that you might need to be able to achieve the outcomes. How would universal governance help enforce or enable that? So over to you, Carol.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Mark has set a very good stage for us, presenting the very comprehensive overview of all the elements involved in API governance. So now I'd like to shift gear and focus on the how, specifically how we can turn your governance strategy into something that's practical, scalable, and also built into your day-to-day workflow. I'll first talk about 5 important building blocks for effective governance. And then I'm also very excited to introduce to you Tyke's Universal API Governance Platform, a solution we designed to simplify governance for you, enforce best practice, and help your developers seamlessly integrate governance into the API workflows. So by the end of the sessions, you'll have both the process and also the platform in place for you to scale your API governance. The only things left would be for you to bring the right people together and make it happen. So, okay. So a while back, I was speaking with some API leaders at different organizations, and one thing that kept coming up is everybody knows that API governance is important, but not a lot of us knows exactly how to get it right. Some teams may dive straight into setting their governance policies without understanding the needs of their different teams, and others may try to enforce governance too rigidly, creating a lot of frustrations and also slowing down development. And the biggest challenge the teams face is it's hard to get the leadership buy-in. Without a clear business value, the governance struggle to get the priority, resource, and support it needs to drive some real change in the organization. So we asked ourselves whether there is some way to help the teams to start governance in the right way. What are some of the important elements that we must consider when we scale API governance? That's how we developed the 5 building blocks for effective governance. So a lot of this just mirror with what Mark has just presented. The core thing is at the middle is when we think about API governance, it's easy for us to focus only on the security, policies, compliance. However, the core thing about governance is to optimize for the right outcomes. So before diving into the details, it's also important to define what governance should achieve for your organization. And since governance is a continuous journey, your goal may evolve over time. Some organizations may start with security or compliance as a baseline to ensure that the APIs meet some basic security standards. But as your API's maturity grow, governance could also be extended to focus on areas like developer experience or business enablement. So with a clear goal, you can now track your governance effectiveness. It may through how it is helping to reduce API security incidents, improve your API adoption rate, or increase developer productivity. So these measurable outcomes can help guide your improvements and also helps to demonstrate the value of governance to your leadership team and to align all the teams together. So here are the 5 building blocks we have identified that are essential for effective governance. First is the visibility and API ownership. Before you can govern API, you need to know what you have. So start by understanding your API landscape, what you have, who owns them, and also how they are used. The second is to define the API standards and best practice. It could cover areas like security, design, and lifecycle policies to ensure that you have consistency across different teams. The third thing is around integrations and automation, because if governance is manual, it will quickly become a toy and it would be very easily forgotten. So it needs to be embedded into the development process of your developers. It should work behind the scene to protect your systems. And then the governance model, what Mark mentioned, the centralized, decentralized, federated, or the platform enabled. So choose one that's best suited for your organization's company culture, team structures, or complexity of your API. So, and then finally is the continuous monitoring and improvement. We want governance to evolve with the APIs, teams, and business needs. So you should keep, from time to time, track your governance adoptions, make sure that your policy set is effective, practical, and also up to date. So with these in mind, I would like to introduce to you our type governance platform, how we want to use that to make governance works for you. So Tyke Universal API Governance is a fully automated governance platform designed to help you to enforce best practice, secure APIs, and also to scale governance. It offers federated API repositories. It helps to auto-discover and catalog your APIs and produce a unified view of your APIs across different platforms, gateways, and teams. There will be no more shadow APIs that fall out of your governance radar. And many organizations now do not rely on a single API gateway. So they have APIs that spread across AWS, Tyke, Apigee, there are systems that are on-prem or on various cloud environments. The federated API architecture creates flexibility, but also creates some kind of governance chaos. So without a unified view, it's impossible for you to enforce consistent policies. That's why we think that this federated API repository is essential for you to bring all the APIs into a single source of truth for governance, for security, and also lifecycle management. And then we offer governance reporting. It has real-time monitoring for you to track compliance, security, and also policy adherence. It could give the teams and leaderships very clear visibility of what's working and what needs to be fixed. And then lastly, for the developers, we offer seamless integrations with their ecosystem. So they might be using Tyke Dashboard, the CI/CD tools, or the IDEs. We want to build in the developer-friendly governance in their toolset. Not just to flag out inconsistency or compliance issue, but to promptly help them to fix the issues before they reach the production. So with Tyke governance, instead of relying on manual governance checklist, we help to automate governance at every stage of the API life cycle. Now let's take a closer look of what we have. First, the API repository. So it is a unified federated view of all your APIs across different platforms. It offers advanced searching, filtering, and labeling features so that you can quickly, easily find what you need. Let's do a quick demo. So with video demonstrating how it works, it is the API repositories. From it, you can link different API providers to the system. And at the end, backend governance system will auto-discover the APIs that lives on the different platform. So here we've linked up with AWS and Tyke, and we are going to add support for other API providers in the future. So from it, once your APIs are ready in your API repositories, you can search and filter for it as you like to find out the information you need. For example, by business domain, you can, with one click, you can quickly see all the APIs capabilities available for this business unit or business domain. Or if you are an API owner yourself, you can filter by this owner field to get a look at all the APIs related or owned by yourselves or your team. Check out any issues that needs your attention. Or another way to find out things or to fix things is by business criticality. By default, we offer 3 levels of criticality. Tier 1 may be your business critical APIs that need extra attention, or you could assign different rule sets to govern the critical APIs. Developers could also go into the details page to check out all the important information about this API, the owners, authentication methods, where it lives, etc. Owners can see a table of issues and their remediation priority. We also want to give recommendations to the users how they could improve the maturity. So it might be by using some of the middlewares available to protect, to validate the request. Other informations like API versions, documentations, related reports, and the API specifications are also developers can easily get those information here. So these all helps to raise awareness of all the APIs among all the organizations, among all the users. So now instead of manually tracking the APIs across different spreadsheets, different dashboard, Type Governance gives you a single searchable source of truth where you get all the details. So next, I'd like to talk about rule sets. We all agree that standard makes API better. However, enforcing them manually across different platforms could be a nightmare. So that's why we built the Type Governance rule sets. Rule sets in Type Governance is some modular governance rules that define what an API should meet to comply with your organization's best practice. So they're modular, meaning you can apply different sets of rules to different sets of APIs. For example, let's say you have a mix of internal and public-facing APIs. You might want that all the public APIs must use OAuth authentications. And you want to protect your high-traffic APIs by enabling the right rate limiting and throttling and prevent abuse. And then the third rule may be all APIs, before they can be published to developer portal, they must meet the minimum documentations and quality checks. So all these can be enabled in Type Governance. You can associate different rules to APIs very flexibly. Another challenge here is that every API gateway and platform has their own way of configuring APIs. So it is difficult to set one policies for all the different platforms. We simplify this with universal governance, where you define the high-level governance policies, and we will automatically adapt them across multiple API platforms so that even if you are migrating your APIs from one platform to another, you don't need to modify your policies rules because that kept them changed. And also, you don't need to start from scratch when you try to set up the governance rules. Once you're on the platform, you'll see tags pre-built rule sets that provide an all-round governance framework for you. So we cover security, performance, compliance, and also developer experience. Plus, the rule sets are compatible with spectral rule sets, meaning you can customize them or import your own rules to the system to match your company's policies. So now let's wonderful and understand what kind of rule sets people need most. Thank you. So as people are responding, let's also take a look at the rule set manager. So here is the rule set managers where you define, manage, and also evolve your governance policies. Rule sets defines the conditions an API needs to meet. So I think that it must be properly audited and also controlled. That's why we've built this approval workflow to ensure that people with the right access can review, approve the rule set change before it go live. So this can prevent unauthorized changes, maintains your compliance, and ensures that policy updates are properly documented and communicated. And also, we want to make sure everybody are on the same page regarding what the rules are. So rule set overview page gives the policy's full visibility for everyone. Developers can easily go into here to understand what they need to comply with. Instead of a hidden governance process, now rule sets are accessible, documented, and also transparent for all. We try to improve the clarity and usability of these rule sets. So we've added things like parameterization. That means that important settings like maximum request per minute allowed for rate limit, authentication methods, or compliance threshold can be defined clearly and easy to reference. So you don't need to really dig into the long rule set documents to find out the answer. The governance teams and developers can instantly see the key governance requirements from this screen. The next, I'd like to talk about the integration part. Governance works best when it is not just a document that sits outside on the paper, but something that needs to be embedded directly into the developer's day-to-day workflow. So with Type Governance, we make that seamless. First, if you're a Type dashboard user, Governance integrates natively with it, so any API changes are continuously validated. Developers can also get real-time suggestions, or they would be blocked from saving a non-compliant APIs to the system. And we also offer flexible integration options. So even if you are not using Type Dashboard or you want to automate this governance check, we offer APIs, SDKs, as well as CLI tools for you to embed these checks directly into your CI/CD pipeline. That means that governance could be enabled and automated within your build and deployment process. And to go beyond that, we don't just flag out the issues, we try to help you to fix them. So developers will get the in-context guidance, suggestions for how to resolve some of the violations, whether it's missing authentications or naming conventions violations. I think that's something that's very important and often overlooked, because these governance prompts can serve as some form of ongoing educations, especially for your new joiners to your organizations. So instead of handing them out some PDF of API standards, they can now get real-time guidance as they work. So it can help them to learn the standards in a natural way and also consistently. Next is the important part, the governance report. The control center for monitoring how well your APIs are meeting your organization's governance standards. So it is simple to set up. You can define which rule sets apply to which groups of APIs. For example, you could create a report that monitor OWASP API security top 10 compliance for all your public-facing APIs, or track versioning and documentation quality across all your internal servers. So once the report is live, you get real-time visibility. You know which APIs are compliant, which ones are not, and what needs your attention. At the beginning, you will probably see a lot of issues coming out, and I think that's okay. Text helps you to cut through the noise by prioritizing those violations based on, first, the rule severity and also the business criticality of your APIs, so that you get a very focused view through this governance report. You know who owns the API, what's wrong with it, and also what to fix first. Now, about scaling API governance. So scaling isn't just about enforcing a one-size-fits-all rules to all your APIs. It's to adapt to what your organization actually needs at that moment. So with API tiers and labels, you can now apply either broad rule sets like requiring rate limiting for across the board, or you could define specific rules for certain APIs, depending on your business function, API exposure level, or business criticality. Our design would work with both centralized, federated, or the platform-enabled governance model. It's flexible by default. And also you get the visibility the governance teams need to track compliance posture, understand where the gaps are, and have informed conversations with the teams. That transparency helps to build trust between the teams and also help to evolve governance collaboratively, so that it is now easier to scale your governance across different teams. So to wrap it up, why are we talking all about this? Because effective API governance leads to real and measurable outcomes. With effective API governance, you could get stronger security and compliance. It helps you to reduce risk and also to stay audit ready. Developers are more faster with clear, reusable standards, improve their productivity. You will reduce the redundancy and streamline API lifecycle for better operational efficiencies. And APIs are now easier to adopt and use because of the standardizations. Users don't need to relearn how to use the API, driving higher business value. And with the right visibility, you get better insights to guide your API strategy and also the investment. So in short, better governance leads to better APIs, and better APIs will bring you better outcomes. So to close it off, what's next? If you're ready to bring governance to the next level, now I would like to invite you to join our early access program by contacting us, talk to your tag account manager. The early access program is designed to bring all the API governance advocates who are passionate about driving API standards and securities in their organizations. So by joining, you will have early access to our product release, to test, and also to feedback. You can collaborate directly with us, the product and engineering teams, to drive our development priorities with your own use case. So yeah, I'm looking forward to talk to you about that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Carol. And again, just so you know, I think we'll send you all the links associated with everything that we've spoken today, both from Mark's governance toolkit, I think, which I've shared in the chat already, but all of that will be part of the email and follow-ups that we'll be doing after this as well. We will share the link to the early access program, how you can check that out, and anything that's excited you, which it looks from the chat that there was plenty there. So we'll do that as well. There were a couple of questions. I think one question around sort of when type governance is going to be released. I think we've already addressed that, and integration with standard licenses. I think that's also coming up, but let's talk about that directly. I'm assuming you might be an existing customer, perhaps, but we can talk about that separately. Will type governance also integrate with type operator seamlessly? This may be a question for you, Carol.
Yes, so because governance API would be available for integrations with anything, so we will integrate with our current toolset, TechSync, operator, Tech Dashboard, to for you to enable the checking anywhere you want.
All right, I'm going to launch a final poll for today, and I know we are just over time just by a little bit, but hopefully you can stay with us just a little bit more. I really appreciate all the time. Any further questions for Mark? From what I'm seeing, there's not much. I think, Mark, just a question to you in terms of if people were to take an immediate next step. Now, obviously, we've gone through all of the maturity model, the different levels. What would be the next immediate action that someone can take at the end of this webinar to start on that journey?
Okay, thanks. I think trying to sit down and everyone sounds like they're at the beginning of that, or a lot of people in this work webinar are at the beginning of level 2. So they've got a few things in place, but it's just scattered. It's more about like just API design best practices for now. So the next step I would take is actually think about the organizational context. And like I say, so everyone said, a number have said centralized. If you're in a position because you're C-level or whatever, then you can actually set up the API Governance Committee, start looking at tools like what Carol's shown, and start thinking about, formalizing your style guides and all of that. If you're in a centralized, but you're not that decision maker, then you need to just work with your team and get your teams doing what they can to try to prove the value that then you can then, show up the line later on, sort of thing. So it's sort of the organizational context helps you think about where you're at, what you really have the potential to influence right now. So I would do that, and I would actually write that values statement. So you've got a ready list of the reasons why you want to encourage API governance with everyone you speak to in your organization.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. I know we are just over time, so just 2 more minutes. I'm just going to share what is up next so that you have a plan of action as well. I think beyond the process, I see from the poll, there are people who are interested about next webinars and courses and certifications and their learning journey in the world of API governance. So without further ado, what is next? I think we need to talk, before I go into what is next, I think we need to talk about something very interesting, which I'm sure is top of mind, top of your news feed on a day-to-day basis, which is essentially AI and AI agents at this point. So sometimes they're used interchangeably, sometimes it means something completely different. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think we're going to be talking about this specifically. And the question that remains is, are you AI ready today? Because the way you perceive AI is going to matter in the days to come. Perhaps it's already affecting you, perhaps it's going to affect you in the future, but how you perceive or how you think about AI is going to matter. So what do you equate AI to today? Should you be equating AI to risks? Probably yes. There is going to be an increased element of risk. Is there uncertainty? Probably there is a degree of uncertainty. Is there hype? Absolutely there is hype. But is it all hype? Absolutely not. There is definitely a fundamental shift in the way we are going to be approaching, developing, designing, managing, interacting with software going forward. And I do not see that going away. So ultimately, are you equating AI to opportunity? If so, how do you make the most of this fundamental shift of how we develop, manage, and interact with software and perhaps the internet at large? Are you ready to make the most of that opportunity? That is the big question. That is what you need to understand when it comes to whether you're going to be left behind, left by the wayside because you've not paid enough attention, you're not ready enough, you're not prepared to make the most of this opportunity, or are you at the forefront making the most of what is possible. But the path to AI readiness starts with API governance, something that we talked about today. API and AI are pretty much the two sides of the same coin, but you need to get your house in order now to make the most of this opportunity that is coming. And that is coming from a technology optimist, pretty much. Um, and the next stop on this journey, we've talked a lot about that API governance aspects today. We've talked a lot about that during Leap as well, and we're going to continue doing that as we go along the rest of the year as well. But what we want to do is to take that next step now. So April 24th, in our next webinar, we're going to be exploring the idea of the AI supply chain, the end-to-end aspects of how do you make the most of your AI adoption journey, your AI readiness journey, and we'll dive into AI governance next time. So April 24th, mark your calendar. AI, APIs on the path to AI readiness. It's structuring the AI supply chain for enterprise adoption. April 24th, 2025, it's going to be 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. British Standard Time, which I think it's 4 p.m. Central Time in Europe. I'll share the link shortly here as well, but it is also going to be available to you right after this webinar. Additionally, we took all of the great content around API governance. We took all the voices that attended Leap 2.0. We've created essentially what is an ebook about all the learnings that we had from the conference, from all the voices, implementers, decision makers, and we've distilled it all down into this ebook. Now, there's a bit of a sneak peek into what it's going to be. We'll be launching this exclusively to this audience next week. So if you're curious, if you're excited, there's going to be our one-stop shop to understand all the different nuances around API governance, specifically an enterprise architect's guide to universal API governance to build clarity into complex systems. So hopefully that excites you. Hopefully you're looking forward to something like this. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you very much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure hosting you. And as I said, our work is not done here. We are just about getting started. I think work with Mark together with other ecosystem experts out there. We want to bring in more voices. We want to be able to help you take that next step in your API governance journey, help you get to that AI readiness and maximize that opportunity as well through the powers of platform, people, and processes. So with that, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you. Thank you so much, Carol. Absolute pleasure having your demo. We've already got some really great feedback. So thank you everyone for being here. Until next time,